The black card slid across the polished marble counter of Chicago's Avalon Grand Hotel, its obsidian surface catching the light. The receptionist's smirk was subtle, but unmistakable, as she looked from the card to the elderly black man standing before her in his impeccable suit. "Is this real?" she asked loudly enough for others to hear. "You know you need a real card for this hotel." What the staff didn't realize was that Elijah Rowe's quiet dignity masked decades of calculated patience. As he stepped aside and made a single phone call, the financial world trembled. $3.4 billion vanished from a deal with a single sentence. The man they had laughed at wasn't just wealthy. He was a shadow billionaire who had spent his life building an empire while institutions like theirs never bothered to see him as anything more than his skin color. Now that mistake would cost them everything. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The Chicago winter had settled into the city like an unwelcome guest, bringing with it a bitter wind that cut through even the thickest layers. As evening fell, snow began to drift lazily from the darkening sky, dusting the gleaming glass exterior of the Avalon Grand Hotel. A classic midnight blue Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a stop at the hotel's entrance. The doorman, a young man named Thomas, hesitated for a moment before stepping forward to open the car door. His delay was almost imperceptible. Almost. From the vehicle emerged a tall, distinguished black man in his early 70s. Elijah Rowe wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit beneath a vintage camel hair wool coat. His silver hair was neatly cropped close to his head, and his goatee was impeccably trimmed. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades in rooms where he was the only one who looked like him. "Good evening, sir," Thomas said, recovering quickly as Elijah handed the keys to the valet. There was that slight pause again, the momentary recalibration that Elijah had grown accustomed to over the years. Elijah nodded politely. "Evening." His voice was deep and measured, carrying the subtle remnants of his Alabama upbringing despite decades in the North. As he entered the Avalon Grand's lobby, the artificial warmth wrapped around him, a stark contrast to the natural chill outside. The space was a monument to modern luxury, marble floors that reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers, plush seating areas populated by Chicago's elite, and staff moving with practiced efficiency. Several pairs of eyes flicked toward Elijah. As he crossed the lobby, a woman in her 50s clutched her designer purse a fraction tighter as he passed, her diamond-studded fingers tensing. Two businessmen paused their conversation, tracking his movement before resuming their discussion. A young couple simply stared. Elijah noticed it all but remained unbothered. After 72 years of life, these reactions had become as predictable as sunrise. He continued toward the front desk, his Italian leather shoes clicking softly against the polished floor. Behind the marble counter stood Samantha Keller, a slim woman in her 30s, with straight blonde hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. Her smile was practiced as Elijah approached. "Welcome to the Avalon Grand," she said, her voice carrying the sing-song quality of someone who had repeated these words thousands of times. "Thank you. I have a reservation. Elijah Rowe." Samantha's fingers danced across her keyboard. "May I see some identification, sir?" Elijah reached into his inner pocket and produced his driver's license along with a sleek Amex Centurion black card. He slid both across the counter. Samantha picked up the license first, then the card. Her expression shifted as she turned the black metal card over in her hand, a smirk forming at the corners of her mouth. "Is this real?" she asked, loud enough for others nearby to hear. "Sir, you know you need a real card for this hotel. We don't accept prepaid cards." A young man at the adjacent station glanced over and snickered. Standing a few feet away, Chloe Richardson, the hotel's newest front desk intern, watched the interaction with growing discomfort. At 23, she was still learning the ropes of luxury hospitality, but something about the exchange felt wrong. She fidgeted with her name badge, wanting to intervene but unsure if it was her place. "That is indeed my card," Elijah said, calmly. "You're welcome to run it." Samantha's smile tightened. She looked at Elijah, then back at the card, making another visual assessment of his suit, his bearing, his face. "Let me get my manager to assist you," she said, in a tone that suggested help was the last thing she intended to provide. Within minutes, Philip Danvers appeared from a back office. The hotel manager was in his mid-40s with perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He approached with an air of practiced concern. "Is there an issue here?" Philip asked, directing his question to Samantha rather than Elijah. "This gentleman is trying to check in with this card," Samantha replied, holding up the black card as if it were counterfeit currency. Philip turned to Elijah with a patronizing smile. "Sir, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. The Avalon Grand is a premium establishment. Maybe you'd prefer something more accessible? I'd be happy to recommend alternatives." Throughout the exchange, Elijah's expression remained unchanged. He had endured far worse than this casual disrespect. Without raising his voice or showing any sign of anger, he reached out and took back his card and ID. "I understand completely," he said, stepping away from the counter. "If you'll excuse me for a moment." Elijah moved to a quiet corner of the lobby and took out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts and made a call, standing with his back straight and his eyes focused on the Chicago skyline visible through the massive windows. "James, it's Elijah," he said when the call connected, his voice low but clear. "Cancel the Roe W&B deal, effective immediately." He paused, listening briefly. "No discussion needed. It's done." He ended the call with a simple click. 20 blocks away in the glass tower housing Warren and Blake Investments, an emergency alarm began to sound on the trading floor. Screens that had been displaying steady numbers suddenly flashed red as the stock began to plummet. Traders scrambled to their phones and terminals, trying to understand what had happened. "What the hell just happened?" shouted one analyst, staring at his screen in disbelief. "The Roe deal. It's gone," another called. "Begas, someone just pulled $3.4 billion off the table." Back in the hotel lobby, Chloe's phone buzzed with a breaking news alert. As a business student working at the hotel part-time, she had set notifications for major market movements. She glanced down at the screen and gasped. $3.4 billion deal. Cancelled. Elijah Roe pulls plug on Warren and Blake partnership. Her eyes shot up to the quiet man now making his way toward the exit. The same man who had just been humiliated at their front desk. The same man whose name was now lighting up her phone screen. Samantha had also seen the alert. The color drained from her face as she made the connection. "Mr. Roe!" she called out, her voice suddenly desperate. "There must be some mistake." But Elijah was already at the door. He paused only to press a $100 bill into Thomas the doorman's hand. "Stay warm out here," he said kindly. "Thank you, sir," Thomas replied, genuine gratitude in his voice. "Will you be needing your car?" "No, I think I'll walk." And with that, Elijah Roe stepped back into the cold Chicago night, disappearing into the swirling snow with the same quiet dignity with which he had arrived. Inside, Chloe was frantically searching for more information about Elijah Roe on her phone. Results began flooding her screen. Articles about a ghost billionaire, references to major real estate holdings, philanthropic initiatives in underserved communities, and now this bombshell about a canceled deal with Warren and Blake. As Philip and Samantha panicked behind the desk, Chloe made a decision. She needed to know more about the man who had just walked away from billions without breaking a sweat. What had just happened wasn't just a viral moment in the making. It was a story about power exercised in a way she had never witnessed before, and she was going to follow it wherever it led. 40 floors above Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, Elijah Roe stepped into his penthouse apartment. The space was a stark contrast to the ostentatious luxury of the Avalon Grand. Warm, lived in, and deeply personal. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, now barely visible through the falling snow. Elijah hung his coat carefully and moved toward the living area where shelves lined the walls, filled with rare first editions, African, sculptures, vintage vinyl records, and photographs spanning decades. The soft notes of John Coltrane's saxophone floated through the room, emanating from an antique record player in the corner. He settled into a well-worn leather armchair, and picked up a tablet from the side table. Already, news of his abrupt cancellation of the Warren and Blake deal was spreading across financial news sites. The headlines varied. Market shock. Roe. Pulls 3.4B deal without warning. Who is the billionaire behind today's market plunge? But all conveyed the same sense of surprise and confusion. Elijah set the tablet aside and reached for something far more precious. An old, leather-bound journal with worn edges and a simple embossed title, Lessons I Couldn't Teach Fast Enough. Opening it to a fresh page, he began to write in a steady, elegant script. Today I was reminded again that no matter what you build, to some you will always be just your skin. Use these moments. They keep you honest. They remind you why you started. This journal was more than a diary. It was a legacy document, filled with wisdom accumulated over a lifetime of closed doors, unexpected opportunities, and hard-won victories. Elijah had been keeping it for decades, though only he knew its intended recipient. As he wrote, his mind drifted back to Birmingham, Alabama, 1957. The summer heat had been oppressive that year, the air thick with humidity and tension. At 15, Elijah spent his afternoons shining shoes outside Harlan's Diner on the white side of town. His hands were already calloused from work, his mind sharp from the books he devoured whenever he could find them. His mother, Alma, worked double shifts as a housekeeper for 2 different white families, coming home exhausted but never defeated. They can work your hands, she would tell him, but never let them take your mind. She had taught him to read by candlelight, using discarded newspapers and second-hand books. Young Elijah's customers rarely looked him in the eye as he polished their wingtips and loafers to a mirror shine. To them, he was invisible except for the service he provided. But Elijah was always watching, listening, learning the way these men spoke about money, deals, and opportunities. One sweltering Tuesday, he had veered off his usual path home, seeking shade in an unfamiliar part of town. That's when he first stumbled upon a small bookstore wedged between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The sign simply read, Chen's Books. Curiosity drew him inside. The shop was narrow but deep, with books stacked from floor to ceiling. Behind the counter sat Raymond Chen, an older Asian man with kind eyes and a serious demeanor. "Can I help you find something?" Mr. Chen had asked, his voice carrying a trace of an accent. "Just looking," Elijah had replied, expecting to be shooed away as he often was from white-owned shops. Instead, Mr. Chen had nodded and returned to his newspaper. Elijah spent an hour exploring the shelves before landing on a used finance textbook. When he reluctantly began to put it back, knowing he couldn't afford it, Mr. Chen spoke up. "You like that one?" "Yes, sir." Trying to understand how money really works. Mr. Chen had studied him for a moment. "Take it," he said finally. "Return, when you've read it, and tell me what you learned." That book became the cornerstone of Elijah's financial education. He returned to Chen's books weekly, discussing concepts and asking questions. Mr. Chen never treated him like a child or a burden. He treated him like a mind worth nurturing. Back in the present, Elijah smiled at the memory. He owed so much to Raymond Chen. The bookstore had closed decades ago when Mr. Chen passed away, but its impact lived on through every deal Elijah made. His first real venture had begun with repairing and reselling radios he found at junk shops. Using the profit, he had purchased minimal stock in a failing hardware store, applied what he'd learned about merchandising and inventory management, and turned it around within a year. By 25, he owned 3 small businesses. By 30, he had started buying real estate, and along the way, he had met Gloria Jackson. As if summoned by his thoughts, the elevator to his penthouse dinged, and Gloria herself stepped into the foyer. Now in her early 60s, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had been in the trenches and survived. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a stylish twist, and she wore a simple but elegant pantsuit. "I've been calling you for an hour," she said, hanging up her coat. "Should have known you'd be in here with your music and memories while the financial world burns." Elijah chuckled. "Hello to you too, Gloria." They had come a long way from that first meeting, when Gloria, a 24-year-old single mother, with a sharp mind and sharper tongue, had applied to be his administrative assistant. She'd been his first hire, and over 4 decades, she had become his most trusted confidant, the COO of his company, and his closest friend. Gloria pulled out her phone and held it up. "Anonymous billionaire disrupts markets after hotel snub," she read aloud. "Couldn't keep a low profile for one night, could you?" "They wanted to see me as a joke," Elijah replied, closing his journal. "Now they'll have to see me. The press will swarm once they connect the dots, and Warren and Blake won't take this lying down." Elijah smiled slightly. "Let them come. They'll look into me. I want them to." Gloria shook her head but couldn't suppress a smile of her own. "For a man who's spent 50 years avoiding publicity, you've picked one hell of a way to step into the spotlight. Sometimes the lesson needs to be public," Elijah said, standing and moving to the window. "How's David's startup coming along?" The mention of her son's name brought a mixture of pride and worry to Gloria's face. "He called earlier, actually. He's excited. Says Warren and Blake's venture division reached out about his new fintech platform. They're talking about a potential investment." Elijah turned, his expression serious now. "Warren and Blake contacted David? When?" "Yesterday. He's over the moon about it. I didn't tell him about what happened tonight. Should I?" Elijah was silent for a moment, considering the implications. "No," he said finally. "Not yet. Let me think about this." The timing wasn't a coincidence. Warren and Blake didn't make moves by accident, especially not with companies connected to Elijah's inner circle. The question was whether they'd known about David's connection to Gloria and, by extension, to Elijah himself before tonight. "He's worked so hard on this platform," Gloria said quietly, "building it from nothing, refusing to take your money. He wants to make it on his own merit. I respect that. But if W&B is targeting him to get to you, then we'll handle it." Elijah assured her. "David's brilliant. He's got your tenacity and your integrity. Let's see how this plays out before we intervene." Gloria nodded reluctantly. "All right, but I don't trust those wolves, especially not around my son." "Neither do I, Elijah agreed. After Gloria left to make some calls, he returned to his desk where a secure computer terminal sat. He entered a long password, followed by a fingerprint scan and a second authentication code. The screen came to life, displaying a comprehensive database of Warren and Blake's holdings, acquisitions, divestments, and internal communications going back 15 years. Elijah had been watching them for a long time, gathering information, tracking patterns, and waiting for the right moment. He had recognized their predatory practices years ago, particularly in how they acquired promising startups founded by people of color, stripped them of intellectual property, and either absorbed or dismantled them. It was legal, technically, but it represented everything Elijah had fought against his entire career. Now they were approaching David, and Elijah had just publicly embarrassed them by canceling a multi-billion-dollar deal. The timing couldn't be coincidental. As he scrolled through the latest data, a notification appeared. A new acquisition target had been added to Warren and Blake's internal pipeline. The company name made Elijah sit up straighter. Tech Soil Innovations, David's company. Elijah leaned back in his chair, the pieces falling into place. Warren and Blake hadn't just happened to reach out to David, they had specifically targeted him. And after tonight's public embarrassment, they would be more determined than ever to close the deal. The question was whether their interest in David was merely business, or if they had discovered his connection to Elijah and Gloria. Either way, the stakes had just been raised significantly. Elijah picked up his journal again and added a final line for the day. "Sometimes the fight finds you when you least expect it, and sometimes that's exactly when you're most prepared for it." He closed the book, his mind already formulating a plan. After decades in the shadows, building wealth and quietly supporting others who looked like him, Elijah Rowe was about to step into the light, and Warren and Blake had no idea what was coming. For them, the same hotel that had laughed at his black card would soon learn what real power looked like, and it wasn't made of metal. The 65th floor of Warren and Blake headquarters commanded an impressive view of Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city skyline, though Gareth Blake paid it no attention as he paced the length of his corner office. His face had turned an alarming shade of red, the veins in his neck protruding as he slammed his fist against his mahogany desk. $3.4 billion, he roared, causing his executive assistant to flinch outside. The half-closed door. Gone. Because some old man got his feelings hurt at a hotel? The three executives seated across from his desk exchanged uncomfortable glances. Gareth Blake was known for his volatility, but today's explosion was reaching new heights. The shareholders are in panic mode, said Vernon Mills, the CFO. We've lost 14% of our market value since the news broke. Bloomberg's running non-stop coverage. Gareth stopped pacing and glared at his leadership team. At 56, he prided himself on his fitness regimen and his full head of expensively maintained sandy hair. Today, however, he looked every one of his years, the lines around his mouth deepening as he scowled. I want to know everything about this Elijah Rowe, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. How a man worth billions has stayed off our radar this long. How he built, his wealth, where his vulnerabilities are, everything. We're already on it, said Tanner Wilson, leaning forward in his chair. At 39, Tanner was the youngest vice president at Warren & Blake, a position he'd secured through a combination of ruthless deal-making and information brokerage. His sleek appearance, designer suits, meticulously styled dark hair, and calculating blue eyes masked a predatory intelligence that Gareth had found immensely useful over the years. My digital forensics team started digging the moment the deal collapsed, Tanner continued, opening his laptop. It's fascinating, actually. Rowe's been deliberately maintaining a ghost profile for decades. Multiple shell companies, private, holdings, real estate through trusts. The man's left almost no public footprint despite controlling assets that we estimated over $6 billion. $6 billion. Gareth looked incredulous. From what? How did he build that kind of wealth without crossing our path before now? Methodically and quietly, Tanner replied. Started small in the 70s with local businesses, expanded into commercial real estate in the 80s, made his first big moves in tech investments in the early 90s, before most of Wall Street recognized the potential. By the 2000s, he was operating entirely through private equity structures that don't require public disclosure. And we never noticed him because he never made a splash, mused Vernon. Until last night. The door to the office opened fully, and Lila Warren entered without knocking. At 32, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew her place in the world, not just as Gareth's daughter, but as the executive vice president of strategic development. Her sharp gray suit matched her focused demeanor, and her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Unlike her father, Lila had built her reputation on careful analysis and ethical considerations. The tension between their approaches was well known throughout the company. This is going to blow up worse than you think, she said without preamble, setting her tablet on the desk. Social media is already connecting the dots between Rowe's treatment at the Avalon Grand and our deal collapse. Black card billionaire is trending. Gareth waved dismissively. Twitter outrage fades. The market will stabilize. Not this time, Lila countered firmly. This isn't just about bad PR. There's a clear narrative forming about how institutions like ours have systematically underestimated and excluded black wealth. Reporters are starting to dig into Rowe's history, and by extension, our acquisition. Patterns. The room fell silent. Everyone present knew exactly what she meant. We operate within the law, Gareth said finally, his tone clipped. The law and public perception are different animals, Lila replied. And our acquisition record with minority-founded companies is problematic when examined closely. Tanner closed his laptop with a sharp snap. We acquire companies based on market potential, not founder demographics. Is that what we tell ourselves? Lila challenged. Because I've reviewed the data, and companies with black or Hispanic founders that we've acquired have a 78% higher rate of being gutted or shuttered within 18 months compared to those with white founders. That's enough, Gareth cut in. We have a more immediate problem. The Rowe W&B merger was going to be the cornerstone of our Q2 growth strategy. Without it, we need a replacement fast. Tanner nodded. I think I may have something. a fintech startup called Tech Soil Innovations, promising technology, solid growth metrics, and the founders eager for a major investment partner. "What's the valuation?" Vernon asked. "They're seeking $50 million for a 40% stake. We could offer the full amount, push for 45%, and fast-track the integration." Lila's eyes narrowed. "Tech Soil, that's David Jackson's company. We just added them to our prospect list last week." "Why the sudden urgency?" Tanner smiled thinly. "Their platform has considerable potential. The timing seems advantageous." Before Lila could press further, Gareth interjected. "Set up a pitch meeting, make it clear we're serious. I want to move quickly on this." As the meeting dispersed, Lila remained behind. Once they were alone, she faced her father directly. "What's really going on with Tech Soil? Why the sudden interest in David Jackson's company?" Gareth settled into his chair. "Business opportunity, nothing more." "Dad, don't lie to me. Not in this office." A tense silence stretched between them before Gareth relented slightly. Tanner found a connection. David Jackson is Gloria Jackson's son. "And who's Gloria Jackson?" "Elijah Rowe's right hand for almost 40 years. His COO. Lila's expression shifted from suspicion to alarm. "So we're targeting this startup because of a personal vendetta against Rowe? That's not just unethical, it's potentially illegal." "We're exploring a legitimate business opportunity," Gareth said firmly. "The personal connections are incidental." "There's nothing incidental about this," Lila said, gathering her things. "You're playing a dangerous game." As she left the office, Lila's mind was racing. She needed to understand exactly what was happening, and she needed information from outside the Warren and Blake bubble. In a small coffee shop near Columbia University, Chloe Richardson nervously checked her phone. Her anonymous blog post, "The Billionaire You Laughed At," had been shared over 20,000 times since she published it the previous night. She'd been careful to change enough details to protect her job at the Avalon Grand, but the essence of the story was unmistakable. A distinguished black businessman humiliated, followed by a financial power move that had Wall Street reeling. She jumped as someone pulled out the chair across from her. "Chloe Richardson?" The woman extended her hand. "Lila Warren, thank you for meeting me." Chloe's eyes widened. "You're—" "Yes. But I'm not here officially." Lila glanced around the half-empty cafe. "Your blog post caught my attention. I'd like to discuss what you saw that night." "Why?" Chloe asked, suddenly wary. "Are you going to sue me for defamation or something?" Lila shook her head. "Quite the opposite. I'm trying to understand what's really happening. There's a larger pattern forming, and I need to see it clearly." Over the next hour, Chloe described the events at the hotel in detail. The subtle racism, the blatant disrespect, Elijah's dignity throughout. In turn, Lila shared her concerns about her father's sudden interest in Tech Soil Innovations. "So Warren and Blake is going after David Jackson's company to get back at Elijah Rowe?" Chloe asked, connecting the dots. "I can't prove it yet," Lila admitted. "But my father doesn't make moves randomly, and neither does Tanner Wilson." As they talked, Chloe pulled up her research on Elijah Rowe. "He's fascinating. There's almost nothing about him online before yesterday, but I've been digging. Look at this pattern." She showed Lila her notes. "Over the past 30 years, he's quietly funded over 100 black-owned businesses, many of them in industries where they'd been systematically excluded. A counterbalance to firms like W&B," Lila murmured, seeing the bigger picture. "He's been building an alternative ecosystem." "Exactly. And now your company wants to acquire a company connected to his inner circle. That can't be coincidence." By the time they parted ways, a tentative alliance had formed. Chloe would continue her research and expand her anonymous blog to include investigations into Warren and Blake's acquisition history. Lila would monitor the situation from inside and share what information she could safely provide. Meanwhile, David Jackson's inbox was filling with meeting requests from Warren and Blake's venture capital division. Back in Chicago, the sleek offices of Tech Soil Innovations hummed with activity. The open concept workspace housed 30 employees, most of them focused on the core financial technology platform that David had been developing for 3 years. At 34, David Jackson had his mother's determination and analytical mind. He'd spent 5 years working at major financial institutions before striking out on his own, convinced there was a better way to provide banking services to underserved communities. TechSoil's platform allowed small community banks to offer sophisticated digital services while maintaining local ownership and decision-making. "They want to meet next Tuesday," David told his co-founder Marcus Williams, pointing to the email from Tanner Wilson. "Warren and Blake, the largest investment firm on Wall Street, is interested in us." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression guarded. "That's unexpected. They don't typically invest in companies our size unless they're looking to acquire the technology. Or unless they see something everyone else is missing," David countered. "Our user growth numbers from the Atlanta pilot are outstanding. We've proven the model works." "True, but W&B isn't known for being community-focused. They're corporate raiders, man," David sighed. "We need the capital to scale nationally. We've been turned down by 12 VC firms already. If W&B is willing to take a chance on us, You told your mom?" Marcus interrupted. The question hung in the air. David's relationship with his mother, and by extension with Elijah Rowe, was complicated. He loved and respected both of them deeply, but had been determined to succeed without leveraging their connections or resources. "Not yet," David admitted. "I want to have more details first." His phone rang, Gloria calling. David shot Marcus an "I'll handle this" look and answered. "Hey, Mom." "David, how are you? I'm just checking in." He could hear something in her voice, tension, perhaps concern. "I'm good. Actually, we just got some potentially exciting news. Warren and Blake's VC division reached out about a possible investment." A pause, longer than normal. "Warren and Blake? When did this happen?" "Yesterday." "Why?" "Do you know something about them?" Another pause. "They're significant players. Have you accepted a meeting?" "We're planning to, yes." "Mom, what's going on?" "You sound worried." "It's nothing," Gloria said, clearly choosing her words carefully. "Just make sure you review any offers thoroughly before committing. Maybe have an independent attorney look things over." After they hung up, David stared at his phone. His mother was usually straightforward, especially about business matters. Her careful response was out of character and only heightened his curiosity about Warren and Blake's sudden interest. Later that evening, as David was leaving the office, he received another call, this one from a number he didn't recognize. "David Jackson?" a woman's voice asked when he answered. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Ava Johnson. I need to speak with you about Warren and Blake. It's important." David stopped walking. "How did you get my number?" "That's not relevant right now. What's relevant is that you're being targeted, and you need to understand why before you take their meeting." "Targeted? What are you talking about?" "Not over the phone. Meet me tomorrow, 8 a.m. Sonder Coffee on Michigan Avenue. Come alone." The line went dead. David stood on the sidewalk, the cold Chicago wind cutting through his coat as he tried to make sense of the cryptic call. His startup was finally getting attention from major players, but everyone around him seemed to be sending warning signals. His mother's careful tone, Marcus's skepticism, and now this mysterious call. What exactly had he stumbled into? Sonder Coffee was nearly empty when David arrived the next morning. In the back corner sat a woman in her early 40s, her natural hair styled in a short professional cut. She wore a burgundy pantsuit and was typing rapidly on a laptop surrounded by papers. "Ava Johnson?" David approached cautiously. She looked up, assessing him with intelligent eyes before gesturing to the chair across from her. "David, thank you for coming. You said I was being targeted. I want to know what that means." Ava closed her laptop. "Before we get into that, I should tell you who I am. I worked for Elijah Rowe for 12 years as his director of venture investments. I left 5 years ago to start my own VC firm focusing exclusively on founders of color." David's posture stiffened. "Did my mother send you? Or Elijah? Neither knows I'm meeting you. This is my initiative." "Why? What's your interest in my company?" Ava leaned forward. Warren and Blake has a pattern, David. They identify promising companies founded by people of color, especially in fintech and infrastructure. They offer generous terms, fast-track the deal, and then once they have control, they extract the technology and discard the original vision, and often, the original team. David frowned. That's a serious accusation without evidence. Ava slid a folder across the table. 18 companies in the past decade, all founded by Black or Latino entrepreneurs, all acquired by W&B. 15 no longer exist in any recognizable form. The remaining 3 were stripped down to skeleton operations. Whiz. David flipped through the documentation, she continued. I've been tracking their acquisition patterns since I started my firm. The data is undeniable, but you're different from their usual targets. How so? They usually go after companies that are struggling or desperate for capital. TechSoil is neither. Your metrics are strong, your burn rate is sustainable, and you haven't been frantically seeking investment. The only logical explanation for their sudden interest is your connection to Elijah. David set the folder down, his expression hardening. I've never used that connection. I've built this company on my own merit. I know, Ava said gently. That's what makes you vulnerable. You've been so determined to succeed independently that you haven't accessed the network that could protect you. I don't need protection, David insisted. I need capital to scale our platform to help communities that have been systematically excluded from financial services. A mission I deeply respect, Ava replied, which is why I can't stand by while W&B targets you as collateral damage in their war with Elijah. What war? What are you talking about? Ava hesitated. You don't know what happened at the Avalon Grand 2 nights ago. For the next 10 minutes, she explained the hotel incident, Elijah's cancellation of the $3.4 billion deal, and the resulting market chaos. With each detail, David's expression grew more troubled. So you think they're coming after my company as what? Revenge? I think Gareth Blake is a man who doesn't tolerate public humiliation, and Tanner Wilson is vicious when he targets an acquisition. The timing isn't coincidental. David ran a hand over his face. Even if that's true, I still need funding. I can't just walk away from a potential $50 million investment because of Elijah's personal conflict. I'm not suggesting you walk away from funding, Ava said. I'm suggesting you walk away from predatory funding. My firm, along with 3 other Black-led VCs, would like to offer you an alternative term sheet. $40 million, fair equity terms, and a commitment to your original mission. David stared at her. You came prepared. I've been following your work for months. The hotel incident just accelerated my timeline. Why would you do this for me? Ava's expression softened slightly. Because 15 years ago, Elijah Rowe gave me a chance when every other door on Wall Street was closed to me. Because what you're building matters. And because I'm tired of watching people who look like us build something valuable only to have it stripped away. As David left the coffee shop with Ava's folder and alternative term sheet, his phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Tanner Wilson, containing a formal invitation to an exclusive technology founders retreat in Aspen the following weekend. All expenses paid, with the promise of significant funding discussions. David's mind was spinning. In the span of 72 hours, he'd gone from struggling to get meetings with mid-tier VC firms to having both Warren and Blake and a coalition of Black-led venture capitalists pursuing his company. The question was no longer whether he could get funding, but which path to choose, and at what cost. When he arrived at the TechSoil office, a delivery was waiting, a gift basket from Warren and Blake containing premium champagne and a handwritten note from Tanner Wilson. Looking forward to showing you what a real partnership can accomplish. Marcus whistled as he examined the basket. They're certainly pulling out all the stops. Too many stops, David murmured, thinking of Ava's warnings. He called his mother. Did you know about what happened at the Avalon Grand? With Elijah? Gloria sighed on the other end. Yes. And you didn't tell me? Even when I mentioned Warren and Blake's interest? I was trying to protect you, David. I didn't want you caught in the crossfire. Mom, I'm 34 years old. I don't need protection. Need information. W&B is inviting me to some exclusive retreat in Aspen to discuss funding. Don't go, Gloria said immediately. David, please. At least talk to Elijah first. So he can tell me what to do? No. I've built this company without his help, and I'll make this decision the same way. The hurt in his mother's voice was subtle but unmistakable. This isn't about your independence, it's about your legacy. What you're building is too important to become collateral damage in a corporate vendetta. After they hung up, David sat in his office, staring at the Aspen invitation. Part of him wanted to decline immediately based on Ava's evidence and his mother's concerns. But another part, the part that had fought for recognition and validation his entire career, wanted to at least hear what Warren and Blake had to offer. He made his decision. He would go to Aspen, listen to their pitch, but make no commitments. Meanwhile, he would have his legal team review Ava's alternative offer. He would make an informed choice based on what was best for TechSoil's mission, not based on Elijah's conflicts or his own desire to prove his independence. In her office, at Warren and Blake, Lila Warren was examining financial records that she shouldn't have had access to. Using her executive clearance, she had pulled the complete acquisition histories of the companies Chloe had identified in her research. What she found made her feel physically ill. Tanner's team had developed a systematic approach to acquiring minority-founded companies. First, they'd identify promising technology. Then they'd structure deals with complex contractual terms that appeared generous on the surface, but contained clauses allowing W&B to seize control under specific conditions. Once acquired, the original founders were typically marginalized or pushed out within 12 months. The technology would be extracted, rebranded, and integrated into W&B's larger systems. It was legal technically, but it was predatory and deliberately targeted founders who had limited access to high-quality legal representation or alternative funding sources. And now, they were planning the same approach with David Jackson. Lila copied the key files to an encrypted drive, her heart racing. What she was doing could end her career, possibly even lead to legal consequences. But she couldn't remain complicit in what amounted to systematic corporate exploitation. She sent an encrypted message to Chloe. If he signs, it's over. We need to warn him before Aspen. The exclusive mountain retreat in Aspen was everything the invitation had promised. Luxury accommodations, gourmet meals, and a carefully curated group of 20 high-potential founders from across the country. David recognized a few faces from tech publications and startup conferences, but most were unfamiliar. Tanner Wilson played the perfect host, introducing David to influential investors and tech journalists. David's platform is going to revolutionize community banking, he told them, his hand resting companionably on David's shoulder. We're extremely excited about TechSoil's potential. The presentations were slick and compelling. Market projections showing TechSoil reaching unicorn valuation within 18 months under Warren and Blake's guidance, case studies of successful W&B partnerships, and technical seminars on scaling. Financial platforms. What wasn't mentioned were any of the companies from Ava's folder. On the second evening, David found himself seated next to Gareth Blake at a private dinner. The W&B CEO was charming and attentive, asking thoughtful questions about TechSoil's mission and technology. Your commitment to underserved communities is admirable, Gareth said, signaling for their wine glasses to be refilled. It aligns with our own efforts to expand financial inclusion. David nodded, maintaining a neutral expression. That's our core mission, providing sophisticated banking infrastructure to communities that have been historically excluded. Exactly why we're interested, Gareth replied smoothly. Scale is the challenge, isn't it? Having the resources to deploy nationally while maintaining quality control. That's why we've been selective about our funding partners, David said carefully. We need investors who understand our mission is non-negotiable. Gareth smiled. Of course. In fact, we've prepared a term sheet that I think you'll find compelling. 50 million minimal board interference and an accelerated deployment timeline. As coffee was served, Tanner joined them with a leather portfolio containing the formal offer. We've included some special provisions, he explained as David reviewed the documents. A backdoor clause that would allow you emergency liquidity, Options after 18 months, preferred shares structure, and technology licensing terms. David's eyes caught on the licensing section, noting the broad language about derivative applications and affiliated utilization. The wording was complex enough that he'd need his attorneys to fully unpack the implications. "This is comprehensive," he said neutrally. "I'll need my legal team to review it, of course." "Of course," Gareth agreed readily. "Though we are hoping to announce this partnership at our quarterly meeting next week, the market response would be significant." The pressure was subtle, but unmistakable. As the dinner continued, David noticed a server who seemed vaguely familiar. Something about his eyes or the way he moved. The man caught David looking and quickly turned away, focusing on refilling water glasses at another table. Later that night, as David was preparing for bed in his suite, his phone buzzed with a cryptic text from an unknown number. "Don't sign anything. Evidence coming. L." He stared at the message, wondering if L was Lila Warren. Before he could contemplate further, there was a soft knock at his door. When he opened it, the hallway was empty, except for a small USB drive on the floor. David picked it up, closed the door, and plugged it into his laptop. The drive contained two items, a video file and a document. The video showed earlier segments of his dinner with Gareth and Tanner, clearly recorded surreptitiously, but it included conversation that had occurred before David joined them. "Remember, don't mention the IP extraction timeline," Gareth was saying on the recording. "The standard 18-month clause is in the contract, but let's keep the focus on the funding amount and market expansion." "Already handled," Tanner replied. "By the time he realizes control has shifted, the integration will be complete. Another successful acquisition. And a nice little message to Elijah Rowe about the consequences of public humiliation," Gareth added with a cold smile. The document was a detailed analysis of Warren and Blake's previous acquisitions of minority-founded companies, showing that systematic pattern of acquisition and dismantling. David felt a cold clarity descend over him. Everything Ava had warned him about was confirmed. WMB wasn't interested in his mission. They wanted his technology and the opportunity to strike at Elijah through him. Early the next morning, he informed the retreat coordinators that he needed to return to Chicago for an urgent matter. He was polite but firm, declining Tanner's attempts to schedule a follow-up meeting. As the private jet Warren and Blake had arranged transported him back to Chicago, David wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt naive for having been tempted by their offer. On the other, he felt a renewed determination to succeed on his own terms, not as an extension of Elijah, but not as a pawn in W&B's corporate games either. When the plane touched down, David saw a familiar figure waiting near the private hangar. Elijah Rowe stood beside a black town car, his posture straight and dignified despite his 72 years. As David descended the stairs, Elijah stepped forward. "Did you sign anything?" were his first words. David shook his head. "No. Just verbal discussions." Elijah nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Then we still have time." Together, they got into the car, two generations united by circumstance if not by choice, both aware that the real battle was just beginning. The drive from the airport was mostly silent. David stared out the window at the Chicago skyline while Elijah sat beside him, giving him space to process everything that had happened. The black town car glided through morning traffic, its privacy partition raised. When they finally spoke, it was David who broke the silence. "How long have you known about Warren and Blake's tactics?" Elijah turned slightly to face him. "I've been tracking their predatory acquisitions for nearly 15 years. At first, it seemed like standard corporate ruthlessness. But around 2012, I noticed a pattern specifically targeting black and brown founders. And you never said anything, never went public with it?" "Going public requires evidence that would stand up in court. They're careful. Everything they do is technically legal, buried in contract clauses and corporate restructuring that looks benign on paper." David shook his head. "So I was just their next target?" "No," Elijah corrected firmly. "You were a specific target because of me. That changes the dynamic. The car pulled up to a nondescript building in the West Loop. Despite its plain exterior, David recognized it as one of the most secure private office spaces in Chicago, rumored to be used by visiting dignitaries and high-level financial transactions requiring absolute privacy. Inside, the space was modern and minimalist. Waiting for them was a small group of people. Gloria, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. Ava Johnson, whom David had met earlier. Chloe Richardson, looking nervous but determined. And a woman David recognized from news photographs as Lila Warren. "You brought Gareth Blake's daughter into this?" David asked Elijah quietly as they approached. "She brought herself," Elijah replied. "Sometimes our strongest allies come from unexpected places." Gloria immediately embraced her son. "Thank God you didn't sign anything." "I almost did," David admitted. "They made a compelling case." "They always do," Ava said, stepping forward. "That's how they've taken down so many of us." Elijah gestured for everyone to sit around the conference table. "Before we go further, David needs to see what he narrowly avoided." He produced a tablet and played the recording from the Aspen dinner, the same one David had viewed the night before, but with additional footage. The complete version showed Gareth and Tanner explicitly discussing how they would dismantle TechSoil, extract its technology, and leave David with nothing but a hollow shell of his company. "They do it to us in different ways," Elijah said as the video ended. "But always the same goal: take what we build, eliminate our ownership, and erase our contributions." David's expression hardened. "How did you get this recording?" "I have contacts from my earlier business days, people who understand the importance of documentation." "You had me watched. I had you protected," Elijah countered. "There's a difference." The tension in the room was palpable until Chloe cleared her throat. I should probably mention that I've received a cease and desist letter this morning from Warren and Blake's legal team." All eyes turned to her as she continued. "They're threatening to sue me for defamation unless I take down my blog about Elijah and remove all my research about their acquisition history." "They found you," Lila said, concern evident in her voice. "That means they're probably tracking all of us now. My father doesn't respond to threats. He eliminates them." "What do you mean?" Chloe asked, her earlier confidence faltering. "I mean, I had to abandon my apartment last night after Tanner showed up with 2 security contractors. If I hadn't been warned, I would have been there when they arrived." Gloria looked alarmed. "They're escalating faster than we anticipated." "Because they're scared," Elijah observed calmly. "For the first time, their pattern is being exposed and documented. Transparency is their enemy." "So what do we do?" David asked. "I still have a company to run, and without the W&B funding, we're back to our original cash runway problem." Ava leaned forward. "The funding offer from my coalition still stands. 40 million fair terms, no hidden clauses. But there's a larger opportunity here." "What Ava means," Elijah continued, "is that this isn't just about saving TechSoil or exposing Warren and Blake. It's about changing the system that enables them." For the next hour, they outlined a counteroffensive that went far beyond defensive measures. Ava revealed a network of Black and brown venture capitalists and founders who had been quietly building alternative funding pathways for years, operating mostly under the radar to avoid the very predation that W&B exemplified. "We call it the underground," she explained. "It started small, just a few of us sharing resources and information. Now it includes over 60 investors and hundreds of founders across tech, finance, and media. The problem," Elijah added, "has always been scale and visibility. Individual success stories are celebrated as exceptions, while the systematic barriers remain intact." "So what's the solution?" David asked. "A rival investment firm," Elijah said simply. "One with enough capital and influence to compete directly with established players, but built on transparency and equitable principles. Not charity, just fair access to capital without predatory terms." David looked skeptical. "That would take billions." "Yes," Elijah agreed. "And between everyone in this room and our extended networks, we have access to those billions. It's not a matter of resources, it's a matter of coordination and will." The reality of what Elijah was proposing began to sink in. This wasn't just about David's company anymore. It was about creating a structural alternative to the Warren and Blakes of the world. The first step, Ava suggested, would be a public statement. David rejecting W&B's offer is news in itself, but announcing a new initiative would change the narrative from defense to offense. Project Soil, David said suddenly, the idea taking shape in his mind. Not just tech soil, actual soil, foundation, building from the ground up. Gloria smiled, recognizing the spark in her son's eyes, the same one she'd seen in Elijah decades ago when he outlined his vision for her. W&B will retaliate, Lila warned. My father doesn't lose gracefully. Let them, David said, his earlier hesitation replaced with resolve. We'll be ready. As the meeting continued, strategies were refined and responsibilities assigned. Chloe would continue her reporting, but with better protection and resources. Lila would provide intelligence from inside W&B as long as she could maintain her cover. Ava would activate her network of investors. Gloria would handle operational logistics. Elijah would provide strategic guidance and access to his considerable resources. And David would be the public face of Project Soil, the next generation leader stepping into the spotlight that Elijah had deliberately avoided for so long. The meeting concluded, Chloe received a text from a journalist contact. The story's getting traction, she announced. 3 major tech publications want to interview me about the blog, and there's a Black Tech Summit in Atlanta next week. They're asking if someone from our group would be interested in speaking. David and Elijah exchanged looks. Perfect timing, Elijah said. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Legal teams constructed defensive shields around their various assets. Technology was secured against potential cyber intrusions. Funding commitments were quietly solidified with Ava's network, and David refined the message he would deliver at the summit. On the day of the event, the conference hall was packed with founders, investors, and media. The schedule listed David simply as founder Tech Soil Innovations, with no mention of the storm brewing behind the scenes. When he took the stage, he appeared calm and focused, though his heart was racing. He had spent his career avoiding Elijah's shadow, determined to make his own name. Now he was about to leverage that connection in the most public way possible. My name is David Jackson, he began. Many of you know me as the founder of Tech Soil. Some of you might know that my mother is Gloria Jackson, COO of Rowe Enterprises. What most of you don't know is that last week, I narrowly avoided becoming another statistic in a pattern of predatory acquisitions targeting Black founders. The room fell silent as David methodically outlined Warren and Blake's tactics, sharing redacted versions of the evidence they had gathered. He explained how W&B had planned to use him to strike at Elijah, and how that attempt had revealed a larger system of exploitation. For too long we've been asking for a seat at existing tables, David continued, his voice gaining strength. We've fought for inclusion in spaces that were designed to exclude us. Today, that changes. Today we announce Project Soil, a $700 million initiative to fund underserved founders with no predatory terms, no hidden clauses, and no extraction of ownership. A murmur ran through the audience. This isn't charity, David emphasized. This is sound investment in overlooked talent and markets. This is about building our own table, one solid enough to welcome everyone who's been left outside. By the time he concluded, the audience was on its feet. As David left the stage, his phone was already flooding with messages from founders, potential partners, and media outlets. The declaration had been made, and there was no turning back. Backstage, Elijah waited with a rare smile. You did well. We haven't won anything yet, David cautioned. No, Elijah agreed, but for the first time in my 72 years, I believe we might. The news of Project Soil's launch spread like wildfire through financial circles. By market close the following day, Warren and Blake's stock had dropped 17% as investors responded to both the allegations and the emergence of a well-funded competitor targeting their acquisition strategy. In his corner office, Gareth, Blake paced furiously while watching financial news coverage on multiple screens. Analysts were dissecting W&B's acquisition history, with particular focus on the companies Chloe had identified in her research. This is a coordinated attack, Gareth seethed. They've been planning this. Tanner stood by the window, his usual, composed demeanor showing cracks. We need to contain this. The Q2 report is due in 3 weeks, and if the stock doesn't recover, I know what happens if the stock doesn't recover, Gareth snapped. Where are we on the digital cleanup? Working, around the clock. We've scrubbed most of the obvious paper trails, but they keep finding more documents. Someone with deep knowledge of our systems is helping them. Neither man voiced the obvious suspicion about who that someone might be. Lila hadn't returned to the office since the day after the Aspen retreat, claiming a family emergency. Her credentials had been suspended as a security precaution, but the damage was already done. What about the Richards girl? The hotel intern? We sent the legal notice, but instead of backing down, she's now appearing on financial news shows. Complete, with evidence packets. Indeed, at that very moment, Chloe Richardson was sitting in a CNN studio, dressed in a borrowed blazer and looking simultaneously terrified and determined as the anchor introduced her. Our next guest wrote the blog post that started what some are calling the biggest shakeup in venture capital this decade. Chloe Richardson was working at the Avalon Grand Hotel when she witnessed the incident that would ultimately expose alleged systematic discrimination in high finance acquisitions. Ms. Richardson, take us through what happened that night. With cameras rolling, Chloe recounted the story of Elijah Rowe's treatment at the hotel and the subsequent market drama. But she didn't stop there. She methodically outlined the pattern her research had uncovered, pointing to specific acquisitions, where minority-founded companies had been purchased, gutted, and shuttered. This isn't about one billionaire's hurt feelings, she emphasized. This is about documented systematic practices that have destroyed innovative companies simply because of who founded them. By the time the interview concluded, the hashtag #MoreThanTheCard was trending nationwide, with thousands sharing similar stories of discrimination despite financial success. Back at Warren & Blake, Gareth's damage control strategy shifted to counter-narrative. He scheduled a press conference, gathering the company's most prominent minority executives to stand behind him as he addressed the allegations. Warren & Blake Investments has always been at the forefront of diversity and inclusion in financial services, he declared to the assembled press. The recent accusations are based on incomplete information and mischaracterized business decisions. We evaluate acquisition targets based solely on market potential and technological innovation, never on the demographics of founders. The performance might have been convincing if not for what happened next. As journalists began asking questions, a video began circulating on social media, footage from a private W&B executive retreat 3 years earlier, showing Gareth making explicitly racist comments about a black-owned fintech company they had recently acquired. We'll strip out the algorithms, move the patents to our Delaware holding company, and let the founding team spin their wheels until they quit, he was seen saying to laughter from other executives. They should be grateful we're paying this much for a company run by. The slur he used caused audible gasps in the press room as reporters saw the clip on their phones. Lila, watching the press conference implode from a secure location, felt a complex mix of emotions. The footage had been in her encrypted files, part of the evidence she had collected but hadn't yet released. Someone else with access to internal W&B systems had beat her to it. It's accelerating faster than we anticipated, she told Elijah during their secured call that evening. My father will be desperate now. When he's desperate, he's dangerous. We expected escalation, Elijah replied calmly. What we need now is the legal framework. How soon can your contact at the SEC be ready? They're already building the case. With the class action lawsuit being filed tomorrow, they'll have all the evidence they need to open a formal investigation. The class action lawsuit Lila referenced had been quietly organized over the previous week. 122 founders from companies acquired and dismantled by Warren & Blake, all alleging fraudulent practices and systematic discrimination. The filing generated another wave of media coverage and further damaged W&B's already reeling stock price. But the real bombshell was still to come. At Tech Soil's offices, now protected by enhanced security, David was reviewing the latest project, Soil applications, when Elijah arrived for their scheduled meeting. We've had over 300 submissions in the first week, David reported. At least half are viable candidates for funding. Good. But we have more immediate concerns, Elijah said, taking a seat. W&B is planning a shareholder maneuver to stabilize their position. Gareth is restructuring the original $3.4 billion merger with Lanton Group to replace what he lost when I pulled out. Can he do that? Normally, yes, but there's something he doesn't know. Elijah's expression remained impassive, but David had learned to recognize the subtle tells of satisfaction in his mentor's eyes. I acquired controlling interest in Lanton Group last week through various shell companies. I now own 26% of W&B's intended lifeline. David stared at him. You've been planning this for years. Decades, Elijah corrected. Not this specific scenario, but the overall strategy. I started buying positions in companies they were likely to approach back in 2005, when their pattern first became clear to me. Why wait so long to move against them? Because timing matters. A premature strike would have been ineffective. We needed the right moment, the right team, and the right evidence. As their meeting continued, Gloria arrived with news from Ava's network. The Underground has confirmed full backing for Project Soil. We're now at $830 million in committed capital, with another $200 million contingent on W&B's response to the lawsuit. Their strategic foundation was solidifying, but Warren and Blake still had significant resources and influence. The next phase would determine whether their counterstrike would land decisively or be absorbed by the institutional defenses that had protected predatory practices for decades. That next phase began 2 days later at the W&B quarterly earnings call. Financial analysts and major shareholders had gathered virtually, eager to hear how the company would address the controversy and stock decline. Gareth appeared confident as he outlined a recovery strategy centered on the new Lanton Group merger and a series of aggressive cost-cutting measures. Despite recent distractions, our fundamental business remains strong, he assured the investors. The Lanton acquisition will be finalized next week, bringing stable revenue streams and new market opportunities. What he didn't know was that Elijah had chosen this moment to reveal his ownership position. Through a designated proxy, he submitted a formal question to the earnings call. Given that Elijah Rowe now controls 26% of Lanton Group, and considering the recent allegations against W&B's acquisition practices, will the board be reconsidering this merger and Mr. Blake's continued leadership? The question created immediate chaos on the call. Gareth visibly faltered. Analysts began shouting questions, and the stock ticker displayed in the corner of the screen showed another sharp decline as traders reacted in real time. This claim is unsubstantiated, Gareth stammered. We have binding agreements with Lanton's leadership, but the damage was done. Within hours, W&B's board called an emergency session to assess the situation. The combination of public scandal, legal challenges, regulatory scrutiny, and now a threatened merger had created a perfect storm. Meanwhile, at a downtown Chicago federal building, SEC investigators were meeting with Lila Warren. Despite the personal cost, effectively severing ties with her father and risking her professional reputation, she provided detailed testimony about W&B's internal practices and document manipulation. These weren't isolated incidents or misunderstandings, she explained to the investigators. This was a systematic strategy targeting specific founders with the intent to extract technological assets while circumventing fair market value compensation. As she left the building, she received a text from an unknown number. Tanner in custody, federal charges. The news soon became public. Tanner Wilson had been arrested for obstruction of justice and tampering with federal financial records in an attempt to hide evidence of W&B's practices. The man who had orchestrated dozens of predatory acquisitions was now facing serious criminal charges. For Elijah, watching these developments from his penthouse, the moment brought no joy, only a sense of long-delayed justice. He had spent his life building in the shadows, creating wealth and opportunity without recognition. Now that work was emerging into the light, not for his glory, but for the protection of the next generation. He opened his journal, continuing the legacy record he had maintained for decades. The systems designed to exclude us can be dismantled, but only with patience, preparation, and precision. What matters is not the wealth itself, but what it builds for those who come after us. In Tech Soil's offices, David was finalizing preparations for the official Project Soil launch event. The initiative had evolved from a defensive response to W&B's attempted takeover into a proactive force for change in venture capital. With founding partners now including Ava's firm, Elijah's resources, and contributions from dozens of successful Black entrepreneurs who had previously operated in isolation, Project Soil represented a genuine alternative to traditional funding paths. We've confirmed participation from 37 media outlets, Gloria reported, plus statements of support from major tech leaders and policy advocates. David nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. What about security? Comprehensive, she assured him, both physical and digital. As they reviewed final details, David received a call from Lila. You need to turn on CNBC right now. The breaking news banner told the story. W&B board votes no confidence in CEO Gareth Blake. Trading halted pending leadership transition. Gloria stared at the screen in disbelief. They actually did it. They removed him. The evidence was too overwhelming to ignore, David replied. The board had to protect the company, even from its founder. What the news didn't yet show, but what Lila had just learned, was that the board had voted to appoint her as interim CEO, tasked with reforming the company's acquisition practices and resolving the pending lawsuits. It was an opportunity she had never sought, but now recognized as essential to creating lasting change from within the system. The call from the board had been unexpected but clear. They needed someone with both insider knowledge and credibility. With the reform movement, someone who could bridge the old and new financial worlds. Will you accept? David asked when she shared the news. I think I have to, she replied. Someone needs to ensure this isn't just a cosmetic change. The system doesn't transform just because one CEO falls. As they spoke across town, Elijah was meeting with a private banker, finalizing the transfer of $250 million in personal funds to Project Soil's foundation. Not a loan or an investment, a direct contribution with no strings attached. You're so sure about this amount, Mr. Rowe? The banker asked, clearly uncomfortable with the size of the transaction. Entirely sure, Elijah replied. Sometimes you need to put real resources behind your convictions. When asked later why he had chosen this moment to deploy such significant capital after decades of careful, quiet investing, his answer was simple. I built wealth for a purpose, not just for possession. This is that purpose. The stage was now set for the public launch of Project Soil and the beginning of a new chapter in financial inclusion. The counterstrike had landed more effectively than anyone had anticipated, transforming from a defensive maneuver into a movement with the potential for lasting structural change. For Elijah, David, Gloria, Ava, Lila, and Chloe, drawn together by circumstance but united by purpose, the work was just beginning. The system that had allowed Warren and Blake to prey on minority founders for decades wouldn't be dismantled overnight. But for the first time, there was a clear path forward and the resources to walk it. The wolves had been exposed. Now it was time to build something better in their place. The morning of the Warren and Blake annual shareholders meeting dawned clear and cold in New York City. Streets surrounding the company's Manhattan headquarters were blocked off not just for the usual security concerns, but to manage the unprecedented crowds that had gathered. Protesters stood behind police barricades, many holding signs with phrases like "Black Money Matters" and "More Than the Card." News vans lined the adjacent streets. Satellite dishes pointed skyward as reporters delivered live updates against the backdrop of the gleaming skyscraper. Inside Elijah's penthouse in Chicago, a different kind of gathering was taking place. Chloe, David, Ava, and Gloria watched multiple screens displaying live feeds of the scene in New York. Elijah sat slightly apart, observing both the coverage and his allies with quiet attention. They're expecting over 3,000 shareholders to attend in person, Chloe reported, monitoring social media trends on her laptop. That's triple the usual turnout. The board tried to make it virtual only. After everything that's happened, Ava added. but the bylaws require an in-person option during leadership transitions. David paced behind the seating area, unable to contain his nervous energy. And we're sure about the proxy votes. The international investors are confirmed? Gloria nodded. All secured and verified. Lila's legal team has been preparing for this moment for the past week. The mention of Lila's name caused a momentary pause. None of them had seen her in person since she'd accepted the interim CEO position. Her communication had been limited to encrypted messages and brief calls, always focused on strategic necessities. The burden she carried, standing against her own father while trying to save the company from his legacy, was one they could only imagine. "It's time," Elijah said simply, checking his watch. On screen, the shareholders' meeting was beginning. The atmosphere in the grand hall was tense, with security personnel stationed at regular intervals along the walls. Board members filed onto the stage, their expressions carefully neutral despite the turmoil of recent weeks. In his temporary role as acting chairman, Herbert Wilson called the meeting to order. His silver hair and distinguished appearance projected stability, exactly what the board hoped would calm nervous investors. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this year's annual meeting," Herbert began. "As you're aware, we face unprecedented circumstances that require careful navigation. Before we address the leadership transition, we'll hear from Mr. Blake, who has requested an opportunity to address the shareholders." A murmur swept through the audience as Gareth Blake strode to the podium. Though no longer CEO, he remained the company's largest individual shareholder and a powerful presence. Despite recent events, he appeared confident, even defiant, in an impeccably tailored suit. "Fellow shareholders," he began, his voice steady. "Over 30 years ago, I founded this company with a vision of excellence and innovation in financial services. Together, we've built Warren & Blake into a global leader, delivering consistent returns and breaking new ground in investment strategies." He paused, surveying the room. "Recent weeks have seen our reputation challenged by unsubstantiated allegations and coordinated media attacks. I stand before you today to address what I believe is an orchestrated attempt to undermine not just my leadership, but the fundamental success of our business model." For the next 15 minutes, Gareth delivered a masterful defense, reframing the controversy as a competitor's sabotage attempt while positioning himself as the only leader with the experience to guide the company through the crisis. "The board's hasty decision to remove me as CEO was made under pressure, without full consideration of the facts," he concluded. "Today, I ask you to reaffirm your confidence in my leadership by voting to reinstate me as Chief Executive Officer and to reject the temporary appointment of Lila Warren, whose inexperience and conflicted loyalties make her uniquely unqualified for this position." Applause broke out from certain sections of the audience. Blake loyalists and those who feared continued stock declines without stable leadership. But much of the room remained silent, waiting. Herbert Wilson returned to the microphone. "Thank you, Mr. Blake. Before we move to discussion, we have an unexpected speaker request that the board has approved. Mr. Elijah Rowe would like to address the shareholders." In Chicago, Ava turned to Elijah with wide eyes. "You're not in New York. How?" Elijah stood, straightening his tie. "I have a video link scheduled, if you'll excuse me." He disappeared into his home office, closing the door behind him. Moments later, his face appeared on the large screens at the shareholders' meeting, dignified and composed. "Good morning," he began, his deep voice filling the hall. "For those who don't know me, my name is Elijah Rowe. Until recently, I was prepared to enter into a $3.4 billion merger with your company. Today, I'd like to tell you a story, one that begins not in a boardroom, but in a hotel lobby." With measured words and perfect clarity, Elijah recounted the incident at the Avalon Grand. He described the mockery of his black card, the condescension, and his subsequent decision to cancel the Warren & Blake deal. But he didn't stop there. "What happened to me that evening was not an isolated incident," he continued. "It was a symptom of a deeper pattern, one that extends throughout your company's acquisition strategy and corporate culture." Using precise data points and specific examples, Elijah outlined the predatory practices that had been uncovered. He didn't raise his voice or display anger. He simply presented the facts with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades studying his opponent. "This is not about personal vendettas or market competition," he emphasized. "This is about basic integrity in business practices. It's about acknowledging that talent, innovation, and value exist in all communities and deserve fair treatment in the marketplace." The room had fallen completely silent, captivated by Elijah's calm dissection of systemic problems that many had suspected but few had dared to name. "Today you face a choice about the future of this company," he concluded. "Not just who will lead it, but what it will stand for. I have no personal interest in Warren and Blake's internal affairs, but as a significant shareholder in multiple companies connected to your operations, I do have an interest in seeing business conducted ethically and fairly." As Elijah's image disappeared from the screens, Herbert Wilson nervously returned to the podium. "Thank you, Mr. Rowe. We will now proceed to the vote regarding current leadership." Before he could continue, the rear doors of the hall opened. Lila Warren entered, walking confidently down the center aisle. Unlike her father's power suit, she wore a simple navy dress with a tailored jacket. Her expression was determined as she approached the stage. "In Chicago," Gloria gasped. "She wasn't supposed to appear in person. It's too dangerous." "She's making a statement," David observed. "Standing her ground." On stage, Lila took the microphone. "Before we vote, I'd like to present additional information relevant to this decision." She activated a presentation showing internal documents and communications that her team had verified and authenticated over the past week. These records demonstrate a pattern of intentional targeting of minority-founded companies, followed by systematic dismantling of those businesses after acquisition. Gareth stepped forward, attempting to interrupt, but Herbert held up a hand to stop him. The bylaws were clear. Each speaker had their allotted time. "Additionally," Lila continued, "I have brought with me today proxy votes from our European and Asian investors, representing approximately 28% of outstanding shares. These institutions have reviewed the evidence and support the board's decision for new leadership." Murmurs spread through the audience. With Elijah's holdings, Lila's proxies, and likely support from institutional investors concerned about legal exposure, the math was suddenly looking very unfavorable for Gareth Blake. "I am not here to destroy what my father built," Lila said, her voice steady despite the tension. "I am here to reform it, to preserve what works while eliminating what doesn't. Warren and Blake can be both profitable and ethical. We don't have to choose." When the votes were tallied 30 minutes later, the results were decisive. Gareth Blake was officially removed from all positions within the company, and Lila's appointment as CEO was confirmed with a 62% majority. As Gareth left the stage, security officers met him at the exit. Among them was a man in a dark suit who quietly identified himself as an FBI agent. The federal investigation had progressed faster than anyone anticipated, with Tanner Wilson apparently providing testimony in exchange for leniency. Outside the building, David Jackson was addressing a crowd of reporters who had gathered in response to the shareholder vote. Though he hadn't attended the meeting in person, his position as the face of Project Soil made him a natural focal point for media interest. "Today isn't about the fall of one company or one CEO," he told the cameras. "It's about the beginning of a new approach to investment and opportunity. Project Soil represents a $700 million commitment to funding marginalized founders with fair terms and genuine support." As David outlined the initiative's structure and goals, Chloe's live blog of the events crashed repeatedly from excessive traffic. The hashtag #JoshLegacyBuilt began trending worldwide, with thousands sharing stories of businesses they had built despite systematic barriers. While the public spotlight focused on New York, Elijah remained in his Chicago penthouse, watching the coverage with quiet satisfaction. When the others had departed to manage their respective responsibilities, Gloria stayed behind. They sat together in comfortable silence, two veterans of a long struggle finally seeing tangible progress. Through the windows, they could see snow beginning to fall over the city skyline. "Did we do enough?" Gloria asked finally, her voice soft with the weight of decades. Elijah considered the question carefully. "We did what we could," he replied, watching the snowflakes dance in the wind. "Now it's theirs." Later that evening, alone in his study, Elijah opened the leather-bound journal that had chronicled his journey. He wrote a final entry with the same steady hand that had recorded his thoughts for over 50 years. The true measure of success is not what you build for yourself, but what you enable others to build after you're gone. The doors are open now, the paths are cleared. The rest belongs to those who will walk through them. He closed the journal and placed it in a small safe hidden behind a bookshelf. On the safe's door was a simple engraved plaque bearing David's name. The battle had been won. But Elijah knew that the larger war for equity and opportunity would continue long after his time. His role now was to ensure that the next generation had the resources, knowledge, and foundation to carry it forward. Legacy wasn't just about money or buildings or companies. It was about continuing the work, the real work, of creating a world where talent and determination could succeed regardless of what card you carried in your wallet or what skin you lived in. 1 year later, spring sunshine bathed Chicago's south. Sighed in warm light as David walked through the polished glass doors of the Project Soil Innovation Hub. The former warehouse had been transformed into a state-of-the-art workspace housing 35 startups, all funded through the initiative that had grown far beyond its reactive beginnings. "Morning, Mr. Jackson," called the security guard with a friendly wave. "Morning, James. How's your daughter's app coming along?" "Got 5,000 downloads this week. She's meeting with her mentor this afternoon." David smiled, continuing through the bustling common area, where founders and developers collaborated across tables and whiteboard walls. In just 12 months, Project Soil had funded 73 companies across 17 states, with a particular focus on businesses addressing needs in underserved communities. The results had exceeded even their optimistic projections. 8 of their portfolio companies had already secured secondary funding at increased valuations. 3 had successful product launches with national distribution. 1 had been acquired, on the founder's terms, with guarantees of autonomy and continued mission alignment. In his office, David found Marcus waiting with the quarterly report. The numbers told a story that defied conventional venture capital wisdom. Companies founded by Black, Latino, and Native American entrepreneurs were delivering strong returns when given appropriate capital and support. The Harvard Business School case study went live this morning, Marcus reported. They're calling Project Soil a fundamental disruption of traditional capital access patterns. "Academics speak for it's working," David replied with a grin. His phone buzzed with a notification. Time for his monthly mentoring session in the accelerator space downstairs. This particular responsibility was David's favorite part of his role. In a glass-walled conference room, 5 young founders waited, eagerly clutching tablets and notebooks. The youngest, a 19-year-old from the West Side named Jamal, had developed an innovative urban farming technology that could transform vacant lots into productive growing spaces. "Before we begin," David said, setting down his coffee, "I have something for you, Jamal." He handed the young man a worn book, the original finance text that Mr. Chen had given Elijah decades ago. "This belonged to a mentor of mine," David explained. "He received it when he was even younger than you. It helped him build something meaningful, and now it's yours." As the mentoring session progressed, David found himself saying phrases that echoed Elijah's wisdom, adapted for a new generation. The circle was continuing, knowledge passing forward, opportunities expanding rather than contracting. Across town, Chloe Richardson was putting the finishing touches on the new offices of Clarity Media, the journalism platform she had founded, with seed funding from Project Soil. What had begun as an anonymous blog had evolved into a respected source for reporting on economic justice and corporate accountability. Her team of 12 journalists, data analysts, and multimedia producers occupied a bright loft space filled with monitors tracking various corporate activities and market movements. Their most recent investigation into discriminatory practices in commercial real estate lending had prompted a congressional inquiry and policy changes at 3 major banks. The interview with Lila Warren is confirmed for next week, her assistant reported. Her communications team says she's willing to discuss the full transformation process at W&B. Chloe nodded, still somewhat amazed at how her life had changed. From hotel intern to media founder in just over a year, a transition made possible by taking a stand that night at the Avalon Grand. Her phone rang, Ava Johnson calling from São Paulo. "How's the expansion going?" Chloe asked, stepping into her office for privacy. "Incredibly well," Ava replied, the excitement evident in her voice despite the distance. "We've identified 22 founders here who are ready for investment. The Nairobi office has already funded 15. Ava's venture firm had expanded globally, focusing on regions where traditional VC presence was minimal but entrepreneurial. Talent was abundant. With offices now in Brazil, Kenya, Vietnam, and the original Chicago headquarters, she had become a sought-after speaker on ethical venture practices and emerging market opportunities. "And how are things at the renamed company?" Ava asked. "Rowan Warren Ventures is outperforming market expectations," Chloe reported. Lila's reforms seem to be sticking, even with the old guard pushing back. Their new ethical acquisition framework is being adopted by 3 other major investment firms. After Gareth Blake's removal and subsequent legal troubles, Lila had faced the enormous task of reforming a company built on problematic practices. Her decision to rename the firm, honoring both her family legacy and Elijah's role in forcing change, had been controversial, but ultimately symbolic of the transformation underway. That evening, the core group gathered at Elijah's penthouse for a rare reunion. Gloria, now serving as Project Soil's chief operating officer, arrived first, followed by David, Ava, Chloe, and finally Lila, who flew in from New York specifically for the occasion. They had assembled for the Legacy Gala, an event honoring pioneers in economic equity and inclusive finance. Elijah had reluctantly agreed to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award after decades of avoiding public recognition. "I still don't understand why I need to be on a stage," he grumbled good-naturedly as Gloria adjusted his bow tie. "Because sometimes symbols matter," she replied. "A whole generation of young entrepreneurs needs to see what's possible." At the gala, held in the grand ballroom of the Thompson Center, Elijah received a standing ovation as he approached the podium. Though he had maintained his preference for privacy over the past year, his role in catalyzing the changes now spreading through the financial world was widely recognized. His acceptance speech was characteristically brief and powerful. "For too long, success for people who look like me has been defined as gaining entry to spaces built by others. Tonight, I want to emphasize a different truth. It's not about being allowed in. It's about knowing you never needed their permission to build something valuable, something lasting, something yours. Thank you for this honor, but the real achievement belongs to those who are building what comes next." As applause filled the room, David watched his mentor with deep appreciation. Elijah had shown him a path that combined principled conviction with strategic patience, a combination that created change more lasting than either could achieve alone. A week after the gala, the Avalon Grand Hotel sent Elijah a formal invitation. The new management, acutely aware of how the previous incident had exposed broader issues, requested his presence for a special apology and unveiling of their renewed commitment to inclusive hospitality. Elijah declined with a polite but firm letter. Instead, he suggested they host Chloe Richardson for a journalistic review of their actual policy changes and staff training. The symbolic gesture would have been easy. The substantive reforms were what mattered. Meanwhile, in Chicago's Chinatown, David had been working on a secret project. Using part of his first Project Soil returns, he had purchased the building that once housed Chen's bookstore, the place where Elijah's journey had begun with the gift of a finance textbook. After careful restoration, the space reopened as the Chenro Learning Center, offering free business and financial education to young people from underrepresented communities. The bookshelves were stocked with resources ranging from basic financial literacy to advanced entrepreneurship, and successful founders regularly volunteered as mentors. "Mr. Chen gave me knowledge when I had nothing else," Elijah had told David when he first visited the renovated space. "He understood that access to information is the foundation of everything else. The center became a pipeline for future Project Soil participants, a place where ideas could form and skills could develop long before formal funding was needed. It represented the fullest expression of the ecosystem they were building, not just capital, but knowledge, network, and nurturing. Summer turned to fall, and with the changing seasons came change of another kind. Gloria arrived at David's office one morning, her expression solemn. "It's Elijah," she said simply. "Last night, in his sleep." The news spread quickly through their network. Though not unexpected, Elijah had been slowing down in recent months. The loss left a profound void. He had been their North Star, their strategic visionary, their living connection to a history of struggle and perseverance. David received a call from Elijah's attorney later that day. "Mr. Rowe left specific instructions," the lawyer explained. "There's a journal that belongs to you secured in his private safe." That evening, David sat alone in his apartment, the leather-bound journal open before him. Decades of observations, strategies, and wisdom filled the pages, a roadmap not just of Elijah's life, but of the system he had navigated and the counter-system he had built. On the final page, in Elijah's distinctive handwriting, was a single line. "Don't let them laugh you out of your future." David closed the journal, feeling the weight of inheritance, not just of wealth or position, but of purpose. Elijah had never sought to be remembered for his billions or his buildings. He had wanted to be remembered for what he enabled others to build. In the months that followed, the seeds Elijah had planted continued to grow and multiply. Project Soil expanded to 5 additional cities. Chloe's media platform received a Pulitzer nomination for investigative reporting. Ava's global venture network funded its 100th company. Lila completed the transformation of Rowe & Warren into an industry leader in ethical investment practices. At the one-year memorial service, they gathered not in mourning but in celebration. A jazz quartet played softly in the background, Elijah's favorite music filling the space as founders, entrepreneurs, and community leaders shared stories of how his vision had touched their lives. One young woman, the founder of a healthcare technology company funded by Project Soil, summed up the sentiment that filled the room. "Mr. Rowe showed us that success isn't just about accumulating capital, it's about deploying it where it matters most." As David looked around at the diverse gathering, people of all backgrounds united by a shared commitment to creating opportunity where barriers had once stood, he recognized the true nature of Elijah's legacy. It wasn't a building or a bank, account, or even a business empire. It was a ripple effect that would continue long after all of them were gone. Each business funded, each job created, each community strengthened was another wave in the pattern Elijah had set in motion. The journal closed. The music played on. And the work, the real work, continued. Was it ever about the money? Or was it always about being seen as human? If this story of power, dignity, and justice moved you, like and subscribe for more narratives that challenge how we see the world and each other.